Anyway, yes, welcome to Folky Fridays. Thank you all very much for tuning in this week. This is Folky Fridays number 50. I was going to try and organise some special guests for today, but they couldn't make it, so we will have at least one special guest next week, maybe a few. We'll see whether I can find a way of streaming from outside in order to have more than one special guest, but one special guest will definitely be allowed. So next week we'll hopefully have some tunes from the shop. No advert. Rubbish. How about now? Did you get one then? I'm pretty new to I've only been able to do this adverts thing for a couple of weeks, so I haven't actually test driven it yet, so I don't know how it works, but never mind. Maybe you've got an ad blocker. Anyway, not to worry if not. It's only 50p. I think it's not going to be. I'm not going to make any millions off it, I don't think. Today's topic is one I've talked about before. It's how to put tetrads into your playing, which is chords that are more complicated than triads, chords with 4 notes instead of 3, or chords with more than 4 notes, like jazz chords, more interesting harmonies like that. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of folkies don't do that, and they tend to stick to some very simple chords, and I'll run you through those first. But then there's also a lot of reasons why you would want to do that, because they sound absolutely great, and because you'll get compliments for it if you're in the right places. And just because you can, I suppose, as well. You know, it's a whole extra kind of level of harmony that a lot of people never even get into. And it's not really complicated once you understand how they work to start implementing chords with names like G major 13 or G minor 7 sharp 9, you know, things like that. They sound complicated, but they're actually not really. So I'm going to be kind of running you through how you can start implementing those over folk tunes. And I have talked about that quite a bit before on the channel, but there's something new that I want to show you as well, which is this little diagram in the corner. Potentially that corner. Which way am I pointing? Let me have a look. That way. This diagram in this corner here, I feel like one of those BBC kind of weather people, you know. We'll have a green front coming in from this end, and a minor second coming in from below. Scotland's going to be raining, cold. Anyway, yeah, so this diagram is really useful. This is one of the most useful kind of things that I ever found when I was learning about how to build jazz chords. And I kind of made my own version of it, which appears in my book, Backing Guitar Techniques for Traditional Celtic Music. Which is this one. So this diagram is straight lifted out of this book. I've actually photocopied it. So yeah, if you want to find out a lot more about building chords and how to use them in folk tunes, then check the book out. It's available on folkfriend.co.uk/shop. You can find all this stuff in there. So the first thing is with tetrads. Oh no, actually, before we get to tetrads, let's just talk about the simple chords first. You've got triads, which are the kind of most common sort of chord with which we're all familiar. And to make a triad, you pick a scale. I'm going to pick the scale of G. Oh, min drop D. So I'm going to pick the scale of G. G goes like this. So there's all my notes. And from that scale, to make a triad, I take the root note, the 3rd note and the 5th note, and I just pile them up. So there's the root G, the 3rd is B, and the 5th is D. So if I pile those 3 notes, I get a G major chord because it's the 1st, the 3rd and the 5th from a G major scale. And the important thing with triads is that it doesn't really matter what order you pile the notes in. It's most common to put the root note at the bottom so that your ear knows how to interpret the other notes. But if I put my G at the bottom, I can have 1, 3, 5, or I can have 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. So it doesn't matter what order the notes are in. It just matters that they are the correct notes piled on top of the root note, and your ear will kind of interpret that. When you get into the folk world, you'll find a lot of people will not play full triads. And I'm working this week on a video about John Doyle. There's not going to be a video tutorial tomorrow, by the way, because I knew this would happen. These artist ones take way more research and editing than normal videos do, and this one I'm just not going to have time to finish it even if I work till midnight. So I'm going to have a relaxed weekend of making this video and release it next weekend. Anyway, yeah, with looking at John Doyle, I noticed that a lot of the time he's just playing chords where he's just got octaves in them, or sometimes just octaves and fifths, and very occasionally he'll chuck in the odd third. But you find a lot of folky players will play chords either with just roots and thirds or with just roots and fifths. So you'll see a lot of things like the power chord shape, for example, which is just root, root, fifth, root, just roots and fifths. And you'll also see a lot of shapes like this, for example, or where it's just all you're actually hearing there is roots. I can put one third in, or I can put a fifth in. So that's just roots and fifths, and that's a very common kind of folky sound to use kind of minimalist chords in that way. There's a few reasons why you might want to do that. Number one is that those kind of slidable shapes are good because you've got a selection of major and minor chords in a key, and often if you slide, let's say I'm in the key of G, if I'm using this shape which has no third in it, that'll work fine as my chord 1. Chord 2 in the key of G should be A minor, but if I slide that shape up 2 frets, there's no third in it, so it's neither minor or major, which means I can use it as chord 2 as well. And I could use it as chord 3, and chord 4, and chord 5. So those kinds of things would work fine, just sliding one shape around. So that's part of the magic of chords where it's just roots and fifths. However, let me just put my phone on the floor because it's buzzing, it's driving me nuts. However, personally, I really don't like chords that are just roots and fifths because they're very bland. They're sort of a very folky sound in a way, but I just think they've got no depth to them. You know, if you compare something like that, where you've got a lot of extra notes in there, that's much richer than something like this. Even though they're both fundamentally the same progression. So that's why I like the tetrad sound, because it's much richer. Just going back to these chords that are just roots and fifths or roots and thirds though, if we are talking about just simple things with triads, there's a kind of basic structure for tunes in major keys, which tells you what chords will go with a tune in a major key. And I'm going to take an example with a tune in the key of G major, because that's what I've been talking about. So if we're in the key of G major, the chords are always 1, 4 and 5 are major chords, and then 2, 3 and 6 are minor chords. And the reason for that, ooh, I'm mirrored, so it wants to go that way, doesn't it? Is that the right way? Yeah. The reason for that is that if you are only allowed to use the notes from a G major scale in your melody, because it's in the key of G major, that's what we mean by that, then you can only use the notes of a G major scale to build chords as well. And so when I build my chords from my G major scale, first chord I can make is like that. The second one is like that, an A minor. The third one, B minor, and so on. So I'm taking the notes of the scale, I'm piling them up by picking one, missing one, picking one, missing one, picking one. And that is always the way that you make your triads within a given scale, and therefore you always get the same pattern of chords within a key. So just once more, that pattern of chords is 1, 4 and 5 are always major chords, and 2, 3 and 6 are always minor chords. And that's your kind of simple starting point when you're talking about triads. If you're in any of the other modes, I'm not going to go into this too much because I've talked about it loads in other videos, and if you don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about the modes, then look up folkfriend.co.uk, go on the videos page and go on the music theory section. That'll tell you all about modes, loads of videos explaining those. But if you're in the other modes, you've got the same pattern of chords starting from whatever mode you're on. So if we're talking about G major, if we had a tune in A Dorian, that's got the same notes in its scale, and therefore it's got the same chords in its scale as well. If you want to see all that nicely represented on a handy wooden disc, lovingly handcrafted by a bloke called James in Sheffield, then get yourself a mode wheel. They will kind of demystify this a little bit and help you remember which chords go with tunes in which keys, and also which notes are in their scales. They're on the Folk Friend shop as well. Hi Frank, good to see you. Biddly bee, what was I talking about? Triads. So yeah, that's the kind of starting point, is you've got 1, 4 and 5 as major triads and 2, 3 and 6 as minor triads. And for chord 7, it would be a diminished chord, but you don't play a diminished chord, you just play chord 5 with its major third in the root note. So if we're in the key of G, our chord 5 is D, D's major third is F sharp, so I'm going to put my thumb round the back and get an F sharp at the bottom, and that's going to replace chord 7 in the key of G. So the thing to remember is, if you want a chord 7 in a major key, just play the first inversion of chord 5. When you get onto tetrads then, the oh, that's nice, Brian. I'm glad your mode wheel's developing a paterna. I've never really been sure if that's how you correctly pronounce that word. It's one of those that you only ever see written down, isn't it? But the tetrads then, the rule is that for a major key, 1 and 4 become major 7s, 5 becomes a dominant 7, and the minors all become minor 7s. With 7 chords, there are 3 types of 7s, the ones I've just said: major 7 chords, minor 7 chords, and dominant 7 chords. And basically, a major 7 chord is what you'd get if you just took your major scale and took 1, 3, 5, 7 from it. So it's the same formula of take 1 from the scale, miss out the next one in the scale, take the third one in the scale, miss out the fourth one, and then take the 5th one in the scale, except now you're doing another hop, missing out the 6th and adding the 7th. So like that. It's the opening to I Loves You Porgy, isn't it? Or I Don't Want a Lot for Christmas, Mariah Carey. But anyway, so that's your major 7 chord. It's 1, 3, 5 and 7 from a major scale. If you take 1, 3, 5 and 7 from the natural minor scale, or the Aeolian mode as we folky people could call it, then you've got a minor 7 chord. So if I play A minor, and I'm going to take 1, 3, 5 and 7 from that scale, that gives me a minor 7 type chord. compared to a major 7 chord, a minor 7 chord has a flattened third, which is what's making it sound minory and dark and moody, and it also has a flattened 7th compared to the major scale. When we get onto dominant 7 chords, they are like a major 7 with a major third, but the 7th note has been flattened. What that effectively means, I'm not going to go into why too much, but they sound very unstable. So if I play D, and then I switch it to D7, or D dominant 7, to give it its fuller name, then I want it to go to G. So they have this kind of unstable quality, and the way that you fix it is by resolving down a 5th or up a 4th, which is the same thing. So that would mean that D goes down to G, because D, if I count back through the alphabet, D, C, B, A, G. So that's what dominant chords want to do. And the reason they're called dominant chords is because when you're using them in a tune in a major key, they are the 5th chord in the key. And in classical times, in classical music, the 5th degree of the scale is called the dominant degree of the scale. Hence why they got that name. But now I just use the word dominant 7 chord to refer to any chord that's got a major third and a flattened 7th in it. When you do what we did before, like making the chords out of a scale which are available using that scale's notes, if we do that for a tune in a major key, like G major, thanks Chonky, cheers for tuning in. Yeah, if we do that for a tune in G major, what we end up with is chords 1 and 4 are going to be major 7 type chords. Chord 5 is going to be a dominant 7 chord. That is because if chord 5 were a major 7 chord, a D major 7 chord would have a C sharp in it, and it can't have a C sharp because we're in the key of G, and there isn't a C sharp in the key of G, there's a C natural. So it has to be a C natural in my G chord as well, and that means that my G effectively has a flattened 7th in it. But if all that's not making loads of sense to you right now, check out the music theory section on Folk Friend and look at the Beginner's Guide to Celtic Music Theory Part 2, because that's got all this stuff in it. And B, just remember the main important things are chords 1 and 4 are going to be major 7 type chords. Chord 5 is going to be a dominant 7 type chord, and 2, 3 and 6 are going to be minor 7s. I'm sure all the people that are currently watching, I know several of you are, seasoned Folk Friend viewers, and you all play a lot anyway and whatever, and I'm sure this is all stuff that you're kind of familiar with. So has anyone got any questions about any of this before we go on, or does this all kind of make sense? Is this all sort of fairly familiar by now? I think we're okay for the minute. So, first things first, I'm going to show you a couple of really handy shapes which give you your 3 types of chords, and I'm going to show you then some ways you can apply them in tunes. First one is a major 7 chord, and a really useful thing that you can do to learn about these is to practice playing arpeggios, because if I play a major 7 arpeggio, Mariah Carey, no, that's true. It's fun once you get it though. So I've got my root, my third. My major third is always that shape away from the root if the root's on one of the bottom 2 strings, which for folk purposes it always is, because you're not going to be using like high chords up here, you're going to be using chunky bassy chords. So you've got a root note, you've got a major third which is on the next string and 1 fret below. You can see that in my little diagram in the corner there. Major thirds are light green on that diagram. Then I want my 5th. My 5th is always 2 frets up and on the next string. like that. And then I want my major 7th. And if you think about an octave is always 2 frets higher and 2 strings across. And so 1 semitone below that is going to be my my major 7th. So my arpeggio goes root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, octave, something like that. I can then compare those notes to what I'd do for a dominant chord instead. So in the dominant 7 chord, the root, the 3rd, the 5th will be the same, but the 7th will be flattened. So my 7th is there under my ring finger, and I'm going to flatten it by a semitone. And so I know that that little triangle gives me a dominant chord, and that little triangle gives me a major type chord, a major 7 type chord. Finally, for the minor, if I do a minor triad, my minor 3rd is dark green on the left hand diagram. So I've taken my 3rd from the major scale and I've flattened it by a semitone, so that makes it into a minor 3rd. 5th's going to be the same, and I want a flattened 7th in a minor type chord, so something like that. So that little triangle is a minor 7 chord. So I really think it's useful to practice those 3 arpeggios and to understand what you're playing within them. A thing that I find interesting is some people have learned guitar in such a way that they're always aware of what note they're playing. Some people have learned it by shapes, and some people have learned it by intervals, which is also kind of shapes. For chord construction purposes, it's much more useful to know what the intervals you're playing are relative to whatever the root note is. And you can see that by the shapes, you can hear it by the intervals. That's what you really need. If you also then know that it's a G, a B, a D, and an F sharp or whatever, that's also handy, but it's much more important to understand the intervals within a chord than it is to know what the notes are. If you know what the notes are and you don't know what interval they are to the root note, that's useless, pretty much. So that's why I think these diagrams where it shows you what intervals are present and what gaps they make relative to a root note are really handy. The root notes are these kind of burgundy coloured ones, the sort of dark red. So the left-hand diagram there is showing you what notes you've got relative to root notes if the root note is on the bottom string, and the right-hand one shows you the same thing but if the root note is on the A string. Just going back to our little triangles then, if I wanted to make an arpeggio or a chord, a little 3-note chord for each of my ones within the key of G, I've got G, then it would be A minor, so I'm going to make my minor, that's my minor arpeggio for A minor, and I can make my little chord triangle out of that with a root, a minor 3rd, and a flattened 7th. Then I take that up to, I've got B minor, then I'd be on chord 4, which is C. For C, chord 4 is a major 7, so I've got root, major 3rd, major 7th. Then we're up to chord 5, which is D. And chord 5 is a dominant chord. So I'm not going to play D major 7, I'm going to play it with a flattened 7th. I really like dominant 7 arpeggios, I just think they sound good. That's chord 5. And so on, and I could work my way up playing arpeggios and playing chords for each one, and I definitely recommend that as a useful exercise. Just at this point here, where I've got up to this fret, if I go much further on with this exercise, I'm going to run out of space. But you can take the exact same shapes. So here's my D7, but starting with the root on the A string. And if you look at the diagram there, you can see that the same shape will give me the same intervals relative to my root note. So there's my chord 5, D7. Then I'm going to go up to E, and I want E minor 7 for that one. And then chord 7 is diminished, I'm going to leave it out, so just ignore that one. So that gives me these useful little triangle shapes and useful little arpeggios to remember where the intervals are. I could play through them: G major 7, A minor 7, B minor 7, C major 7, D7, E minor 7, something, and then we're back to the start on G major 7 way up there. So that's the kind of starting point for understanding where the tetrads go. And if you're in one of the other modes, the tetrads are almost the same. So if I was in, let's say I was doing a tune in A Dorian, like Cliffs of Moher, for example, I'd have the same set of tetrads that I had in the key of G. So G major 7, C major 7, D would be dominant because that was chord 5. It's still dominant in A Dorian. I'll just move that way a bit, sorry you can't see it, can you? But the really important thing that is different is that in any mode that isn't Ionian, the 7th chord is going to be dominant as well. So in this case it wouldn't be G major 7, it would be G7. That is because you want your 7 chord to be kind of unstable, because it's going to resolve back to chord 1 and make stuff sound finished. So that's true for any mode which isn't Dorian, which isn't Ionian rather. Your chord 7 will be a dominant 7 chord. So let's just run through the ones that we would have in A Dorian. If I just do it with triangles again. So I'd have A minor 7, B minor 7, C major 7, D7 dominant, E minor 7, F diminished I'm going to avoid, or use an inversion of chord 5, I'll do it like that. And then my G, my chord 7, is going to be G7, and that's going to take me back to A minor 7. So you can make some quite nice little, slightly odd, but very minimal jazz kind of chord progressions which will fit with folk tunes just using those little triangles. I'm going to show you quickly some ways that you can actually use just the triangles and get really nice full sounding chord progressions, and the way that you do that is just use them in keys where they fit with the open strings. Because if you're in the key of E major, where the top 2 strings and the bottom string harmonise with it, you just use a little E major 7 triangle, you've got a lovely E major 7 chord that sounds really nice for, so a tune like MacArthur Road you could do. There's not many folk tunes in E major admittedly, but you can do it. And you could use the other triangles then, so your C sharp minor, and then your B7, and just leave the top 2 strings in all the chords. Those kinds of things. So yeah, you can also do it in the key of G, because in the key of G you've got a G string which obviously harmonises with G, you've got a B which is G's major 3rd, and you've got an E up the top which, although it's not in the G chord, it is in a G scale, it's the 6th, so it sounds okay. kind of sort of moody teenage romance kind of chord progression, I guess. So yeah, you can use these triangles just in their own right. The thing that these triangles are useful for is something that a 10-year-old, I think, who I teach piano to, said to me the other day, which I thought was really good, and I'm going to steal. We were talking about how to build jazz chords, and it's kind of like we were talking about it like it's like building a house. So we were designing all these cool houses where the house has got minarets and turrets and a tower on the top. Yeah. But what we concluded was that you can't build turrets if the foundation isn't a good strong square house first. So the right kind of tetrad is your foundation, or even the right kind of triad is your foundation. That's your rectangular house. And then your turrets and everything else that you build at the top are any extra notes that you add to a chord. Because you can take a chord, if I'm in the key of A major, for example, I like to play just basically an A chord at the bottom. I've got root, fifth, root, and you can see on my diagram that these are the intervals that I'm playing. Root, fifth, root, third. So I've got an A major chord there with just roots, fifths and thirds. But then at the top, if I leave the B string in it, I've added the second note from the scale. And you would have thought, well, the second note of the scale shouldn't be in that chord. But so long as it is from the scale, as long as it's a note from the scale of the key that you're in, if you leave it in near the top pitch in the chord, it won't hurt anybody. It'll sound nice and a bit jangly. On the other hand, if I had it in right at the bottom, if I had something like this, then I've got a real muddy bottom end because I've got adjacent bass notes clashing. That's maybe quite artistically quite a nice chord, but you could never really use it under a folk tune. So long as you're adding notes from the scale that the tune is written in, you can add any notes that you want to a chord near the top of the chord, but not near the bottom. Obviously some will work better than others, and if you can keep notes in common between multiple chords in a progression, then it'll sound really nice because it's kind of gluing the jazziness together and making it sound not too clever for its own good, I suppose. Yeah. When you're in tetrad land, then your kind of little triangles at the bottom are your house. Your fundamental house is the root and the third and the right kind of seventh, and then maybe the fifth if there's room for it, but it's not really important. So if I was, let's go back to our example in the key of G. This shape is really handy. This is root, seventh, major third, root, seventh, major third, like that. You can see on my little left-hand diagram there why that works. We've got the root in burgundy, we've got the seventh in lilac, and we've got the green, the acid green major third. So that is my major 7 house, and on top of that, if I take any notes from a G major scale and add them on top, I'll get something which will sound fine as a G major chord. That's the 5th. That's the 6th, otherwise known as the 13th. That's the 6th and a 9th. That's an extra major 7th. Or I could just leave the top 2 strings open and have an extra major 3rd and a 6th. So all of those will be fine as a G major substitute, as long as you've got the right root third, fifth and seventh near the bottom of your chord. Putting extra notes at the top will not matter. So that's why when you see these chords that have got names like G major 13, something like that, you know, and it sounds really complicated, what really matters is it's G major. It doesn't really matter that it's G major 13. You could play G major 9 instead and it would sound fine. So the really important thing is whether it's a major chord, a minor chord, or a dominant chord. If you're in jazz territory, dominant chords are used all over the place, but in folk territory generally they're only used for chord 5 in a major key, or whatever the equivalent is in one of the modes, and chord 7 in any mode. That's kind of what my central point was for today, really, that you've got to build your turrets on your house, and your house has to be the right kinds of sevens. Let's just finish up with having a little look at this diagram. As well as playing the arpeggios at the bottom, that's one of the most useful things, because that's all the important notes within your scale, the ones which are important within your chord, the ones which need to be included, are all included in that little exercise. And if you do that for minors as well, and for dominants, then you've got your building blocks for the bottom half of your chord. You can also then do that for the upper octave, something like that. That's a major 7 arpeggio for the upper half. And then you could do minor, and you could do dominant. Of course there's like 2 or 3 different positions you could play those in, but you can get those off that diagram and work them out for yourself. It's useful to have that as an exercise under your fingers, because for other types of guitar playing, if you want to build chords fast, you might want to build higher up chords, like a major 7 or a dominant, or a minor. You know, so that arpeggio exercise higher up is useful, but more useful for the higher up end is learning the whole line going across. So with your root note on the bottom string, I remember learning root 4th, flattened 7th, minor 3rd, 5th, root, and that's just the line on the same fret going across. Because now I know if I bar, I'm going to get a minor. If I just played a bar, I'd get a minor chord and an 11th or a 4th added. I'm just going to put in the chat as well what the 9ths and the 11ths and so on actually are, because this comes from the fact that if you play adjacent notes they sound horrible, but if you play adjacent notes where one of them is up an octave they sound okay. So the 9th note is the second note in the scale. They call it the 9th because it's assumed that it's octaved up in order to make the chord sound nice. Likewise, the 11th is the 4th note, but an octave up, and the 6th is the 13th note. So when you see a 13 chord, for example, it's got the 6th note in it, and probably also the lower ones, so the 9th and potentially the 11th as well. There's one other thing about this as well. 11th chords, I don't use them for folky stuff, because I just find that a chord with an 11 in it, to my ears, just doesn't sound very nice. So for folky stuff, I've never got into using them. I still don't. I'm sure you can do, but I just don't like the 4th in there personally. I'm sure there's physics behind that, but I haven't bothered to look into what it is. But 13s and 9s really nice. Oh, the other line that's useful is the same line, but beginning with the root note on the A string, because the gap between the G string to the B string is different to the gap between all the other strings, which is a bit of a pain. You have to learn the line starting from the A string separately. So then you've got root note, fourth, flattened seventh, but then it changes to ninth and fifth. Yeah, so it's root, fourth, flattened seventh, ninth, fifth. So yeah, those two little lineups are really worth learning, and then you can start thinking about how could I build. Let's say I wanted a major 13 chord, so I might start out with my major triangle like that, and I'd think, well, I want the 6th. I know there's a 5th there, so I can get my 6th there. And then I'd think, oh well, the 9th is conveniently there, so I'll oh, not the 9th, sorry, the major 3rd is conveniently there, so I'll just flatten that finger. So yeah, those two diagrams and a bit of playing about with building jazzy chords is going to massively enhance your repertoire of cool chords that you can turn to. And just bear in mind that in the keys of A, G, any, or A minor, G, E minor, B minor, any key where the top 2 open strings harmonise with it, or even the top 3 if you're really lucky, like in the key of G, then just use really simple small triangles. Very last thought on this is part of the reason why players like John Doyle and I saw a really good video by the Horton family on YouTube. That they're a couple that have got a really good YouTube channel about folk music. But they do some really interesting videos where they play tunes and then they chat about how they're harmonising them and stuff like that. One of their videos they were talking about using chords with just thirds or chords with just fifths as well. That's really worth a look if you like that kind of sound. One of the reasons why these kinds of players use those chords a lot is that they're very definite and very, very kind of strident. They sit nicely under a tune. They're a very solid house, if you like, and the tune's just plinkling about on top of it. When you get into tetrad land, tetrads are like the picture's gone fuzzy. Tetrads are like when you see old footage of like Super 8 cameras, and there's like a video of I don't know, a girl running through a meadow holding a ribbon, and it's shot on a Super 8 and it's all grainy and very yellow. That's what tetrads sound like, whereas chords with just fifths are just dead clear but a bit of a boring film. And chords with just roots and thirds are maybe slightly more emotionally resonant, but they're not really there's not really much depth to them either. But they're very clear. So if you start using tetrads, you've kind of got to carry on using tetrads. It's not like you can just throw in the odd major 7 chord here and there. You can throw in the odd 7 chord for chord 5, that's fine. That's very definite, it wants to go back to chord 1. All good. But if you start getting into major and minor 7s, you kind of end up throwing in more and more of them. Because it feels like it's gone out of focus, and that's nice, but it's kind of mellower, and to go back and forth then seems a bit jarring. One thing that is interesting is if there's a change in tunes coming up, you can start out definite and muted and let things go bigger and fuzzier over time, or vice versa. You know, you can use it as a thing to change the dynamics of a set over time. So if I started out with, if I was playing a tune in the key of E, and then I gradually go, sorry, let's do E minor actually. So that's a major 7 chord. This is very definite. This has gone a bit fuzzy. Now I'm going to fuzz it up. So I've expanded everything. It's got area, and those extra notes have added kind of depth in a way, but it's all got a lot. It's got a lot bigger somehow, a lot more top heavy. And if then there was a tune change coming up, and I'd let everything get really airy, and then it might change tune, and I might go straight back to just roots and fifths, really chunky, and that'll actually add a lot of energy. If you completely cut back on everything, suddenly the tune shines through a lot more again, and it feels like there's a lot more energy in the set. So yeah, you don't always have to build, you can cut and actually add energy by doing so sometimes. Anyway, that's about everything I had to say on this topic today. There'll be a lot more on the subject of cutting for tune changes in the John Doyle video, which is going to be out next weekend. Sorry there isn't one this weekend, I just can't physically do it. So yeah, I'll definitely have one out next weekend. Thanks, Brian. Cheers. Does anybody have any questions about anything before I go, or...? Oh, just out of curiosity, as well as this video about John Doyle, I'm going to do more drop D videos, because I realise I haven't really done many. I'd be interested to know who in the chat at the moment plays in drop D, and who, or even if anyone plays in dadgad, or who plays in standard. Just what tunings are you using, and which are you most au fait with, and which others are you potentially interested in? Ah, thanks, Mike. Cheers for tuning in. That's funny. I was watching Cheers this morning on Channel 4. That's the only thing I know about Boston, I'm afraid. But oh, and Ted. Probably not your proudest exports, I guess, but they are good. Whiskey before breakfast in drop D. Oh, cool. Yeah. Drop D in standard, never dadgad. Okay. Yeah, that I don't do much with dadgad. I tend to stick with standard and drop D for things in D, just to get the low bass note. Sometimes use drop D for G major as well. Okay, well that's interesting. Thanks for that. I'll bear that in mind. I think there's definitely room for some videos about drop D, because there's a lot of big players that use it all the time and don't change out of it even when they're in keys that it doesn't suit, like E. Which I find that quite interesting. I don't really get why you wouldn't just tune back to standard for tunes in E minor and stuff like that. But I suppose if you've got multiple tunes in a set, one's in E minor and one's in D, then it makes sense. But so yeah, I'm going to make some more videos about that soon anyway. So hopefully we can all get the drop D tuning going. But wicked. Well, thank you all very much for tuning in. Thanks to Frank. Thanks to Brian. Thanks to Mike. Thank you to Chonky. Thank you to the other people out there in the ether as well. If you want a copy of this diagram, you can find it in Backing Guitar Techniques for Traditional Celtic Music. It's somewhere in the chord construction section. And if you haven't got that already, then check out folkfriend.co.uk/shop. You can also get the mode wheel there, which will show you all the chords in any key, and my various other books, like the Fingerstyle ones, and strings and capos and tuners and all sorts of other good stuff. So yeah, go and check that out. Finale Guitar will have a brand new online shop being launched very, very soon as well. I'm kind of in the process of getting it ready at the moment, but that's going to be a couple of weeks away yet. That'll be a much more complete range of guitar accessories and guitars and strings and all sorts of good stuff. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to find more Folk Friend stuff as well, check out folkfriend.co.uk. There's a mailing list on there, and there's also the Folk Friend Facebook where I post the links for these streams and my tutorial videos, and you can find that here. There you go. Cool, so that's it from me for this week. Thanks very much. See you all next time.